got 2 cars approaching here, and we'll see what they do.
In between KCUR and the parking lot where I park my car is an infamous crosswalk.
Should we try to cross the street together?
Oh yeah, let's do it. For years, my coworkers and I have used it on a daily basis. And ask anyone, it is sometimes the worst part of our day.
I'm waving at the cars. They are not stopping. About 12 cars have just gone by.
No one even considered it.
Cars are supposed to stop at striped crosswalks for pedestrians. We have like the lighting signal and everything, and that doesn't really matter.
I mean, even with it, it's like dangerous when cars do stop for you. Like, it was like a year or 2 ago, our coworker Hallie was like crossing, and I was behind her, and I had decided not to go, but she went, and a car stopped for her, and the car behind just like rear-ended that car.
It was a 3-car pileup.
Really, the worst part is when one car stops, but none of the other cars stop.
For this reason, sometimes we actually cross the street outside the crosswalk, where there's a median. So you can cross 2 lanes, wait for things to sort of die down, and then cross the next 2.
I can probably count on my one hand how many times every lane has stopped for me. It's very rare.
Every time it happens, especially if I'm leaving work with a couple of coworkers, the one time that every car is stopped, we're like, oh, wow, oh, thank you, and we're waving at every car like it's like a celebrity red carpet. It should not feel that way. It should be pretty normal to be able to cross the street.
Is there something about the culture of Kansas City that maybe makes drivers less aware of these issues or ignore them more?
This is my Roman Empire. Yes, the car culture of Kansas City makes being a pedestrian or just a non-driver so dangerous here because it's so ingrained in people's collective culture and memory.
There are a ton of streets like this around Kansas City, so it's not particularly surprising that sometimes pedestrians feel safer crossing outside the crosswalks, if there's even a crosswalk at all. But here's the thing, that maneuver, jaywalking, it was illegal in Kansas City until pretty recently. And not just that, the very word jaywalking was invented in Kansas City. I'm Mackenzie Martin, and this is A People's History of Kansas City.
The dictionary says that a jaywalker is someone who crosses the street carelessly without obeying the traffic regulations so that he is endangered by the traffic.
A jaywalker can never be dead right, but he most certainly can be dead wrong, and often is. In fact, crossing between intersections is one of the great causes of pedestrian fatality.
In 1912, Kansas City became the first city in the country to arrest people for jaywalking. And it set off this chain of events that eventually led to our enormous, sprawling highway system and our country being redesigned for the car at the expense of the pedestrian. The person who knows this history better than almost anyone is Peter Norton.
I'm an associate professor of history at the University of Virginia.
You are also the author of Fighting Traffic, The Dawn of the Motor Age in the American City. How did you get the idea to write this book?
Well, it came from a lot of things, but maybe most of all being a teenager and then a young guy in his 20s without a car trying to get around America. And finding out that, the world had been re-engineered to serve everybody but people walking. I mean, it had been re-engineered for drivers, really. I thought that was a little crazy, and I wanted to know how that happened. And that was really how Kansas City got my attention.
Okay, so let's start with kind of the early 1900s. Paint the scene of a street in a place like Kansas City in the early 1900s.
So in some ways, you would recognize the streets of Kansas City, especially downtown Kansas City. There wouldn't be as many parking lots, but the street grid was there. What was different was there were no traffic lights, say 110 years ago, generally no stop signs, no traffic directions, no speed limit signs, no lanes painted on the road. What this was reflecting was the fact that from the point of view of a Kansas City resident in, say, 1910, the street is for everybody.
The street was governed sort of like a public park. You could walk, you could bike, you could push a vendor cart, you could hop on a Kansas City cable car. which was one of the largest systems in the United States at the time, by the way.
If you were going to do something like drive an automobile, it was on you, the driver, to watch out for people walking everywhere.
If there was a traffic dispute, like someone going too fast, it was enforced by the police officer standing at the corner. And more often than not, it was the pedestrians who triumphed.
The car was the newcomer, and the car was supposed to conform. The sort of mainstream view was that the responsibility is all on the people who choose to operate a dangerous machine, the automobile. You can't ask people walking to change their worlds to accommodate this minority of privileged people with automobiles.
What a crazy thought to look back on, that was the perspective we all had.
That's right. Yeah, we've really lost our connection to that perspective.
It's worth noting here that in the early 1900s, cars were moving very slow, like 5 to 15 miles an hour kind of slow. But it didn't take long for that to ramp up.
So once you have drivers driving cars that are going more than about 20 miles an hour, now you have the misjudgments. And the misjudgments, whether it's the driver's misjudgment, the pedestrian's misjudgment, or both, could have very serious consequences.
Every year, more and more cars were injuring and killing people.
There was a transition period where the practices had not adapted to this new vehicle.
And it's around this time that we see the popularization of a new word.
And that's the word jaywalker, thanks to a Midwestern slang term of jay.
Does Kansas City rightfully claim the origin of this word?
Yes. I don't think there's any doubt about it. The Kansas City area, including eastern Kansas, western Missouri, is where this term really got into circulation.
The important part of the word to pay attention to here is jay, which in essence meant idiot, and immediately turned any noun into a 19th century insult. Oh, no one showed up to see the traveling Shakespeare theater troupe? Well, that's because it's a J-town. They're not sophisticated enough here to really understand art. Oh, there's a farmer blocking the road with his wagon? What a J driver. Country bumpkins have no idea how to behave in cities. Oh, someone has stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, looking into the store's big show window? What a jaywalker. That guy needs to learn to keep walking like everybody else.
Jay Driver, I find, by 1904, a little bit ahead of Jay Walker.
If you're wondering, weirdly enough, jaywalking doesn't actually have anything to do with the Jayhawk, the mascot for the University of Kansas. That's a sort of mythical bird and was used as the moniker for the Kansas Free Staters who caused a ruckus during the Civil War. So the Jayhawk is totally innocent of any anti-pedestrian bias. In 1911, Kansas City implemented a new ordinance that prohibited pedestrians from crossing anywhere other than regulated crosswalks, aka jaywalking. The new crime carried a potential fine ranging from $5 to $50. And while there were some earlier ordinances restricting pedestrians in cities like Boston and Minneapolis, none of those were ever really enforced. And none of them used the word jaywalking, making this Kansas City ordinance the earliest of its kind in the country.
That law was a pioneering path-breaking law in the sense that actually pedestrians were getting restricted and police officers were enforcing the law.
Was this law directly related to these deaths that we're seeing? Like, is that why we started seeing the restricting of pedestrians in this way?
Yes, in a kind of complicated way, because not only was it legitimate concern for the safety of Kansas City people walking around the city, there was a more specific concern about who was going to be liable in the case of somebody getting injured or killed. Automobile clubs, which represented car drivers, and insurance companies and dealers were all very anxious that every time a driver in Kansas City injured or killed a pedestrian, they were held liable for it because the street at that time was for everyone. They couldn't say, oh, well, that person walked right out into the street, because the judge would say, well, that person was entitled to walk out in the middle of the street.
Once Kansas City had this new law, however, it fell to policemen to train pedestrians on who really had the right-of-way on the street. The first person to ever be arrested for jaywalking was Samuel Hebel, who got caught on January 25th, 1912, at the corner of 10th and Main. The Kansas City Star reported that his name was, quote, enrolled on the illumined scroll of martyrs sacrificed to the advancement of mankind. This pro-automobile approach was so novel, it made the national newspapers.
Washington motorists are much interested in a new ordinance recently put into effect in Kansas City, Missouri.
Kansas City has decided that the, quote, jaywalker is a menace to traffic in a busy city and will not permit him to stray all over the street.
New York is giving serious consideration to controlling the pedestrians, while in Chicago, an ordinance with this end in view is in course of preparation.
But not every city fell in line. Some people pushed back on the idea that their personal freedoms should be restricted to benefit motor vehicles. I mean, everyone should look both ways, for sure, but was this the best use of a policeman's time? Was ticketing people for this really going to lower traffic deaths?
It is to be hoped that Kansas City will be progressive enough to prescribe the strictest possible regulations. The pedestrian should be forced to carry head and tail lights, and he should be provided with a horn which he can give a loud, clear note so that express wagons and freight trucks might have plenty of warning and ample time to get out of the way.
Kansas City pedestrians didn't take to this new law too kindly either. When officers tried to stop a group of women from jaywalking, they, quote, demanded that police stand aside.
And according to this report, the police officers were struck by parasols.
Kansas City officers somewhat relaxed enforcement after that.
Repartee in the Southside Court today, where Wentworth Griffin, attorney, was defending a man charged with driving a motor car carelessly. Remember, Judge, there are many jaywalkers in Kansas City. Motorists should have some rights. No, Mr. Griffin, replied the judge. Reckless motorists have no rights in this court.
It is rather strange that a pedestrian should be arrested for a trifling violation of the regulations, while automobile drivers habitually disregard most all of the sections relating to them.
The lesson to the car interest groups was, okay, we're going to look terrible if we just plop these laws down. We have to have an education period first.
Don't cross the street in the middle, in the middle, in the middle, in the middle, in the middle of the block. Don't cross the street in the middle, in the middle, in the middle, in the middle, in the middle of the block. Teach your eyes to look up, teach your ears to hear. Walk up to the corner where the coast is clear, and wait until you've seen the light.
Hey there, it's Suzanne Hogan. Hope you're enjoying this episode about the history of jaywalking. Like Mackenzie said, this whole period in the 1920s is partly what set the ground for the U.S. highway system. And if you want to know more about that, in particular, how the building of an iconic local highway in Kansas City destroyed neighborhoods and sparked a social movement, then check out the episode, Can Kansas City Repair What Highway 71 Destroyed? Just cue it up in your feed now and give it a listen after this.
So, by the 1920s, how was America's love affair with cars going? Well, the Industrial Revolution was bringing people from rural farms to work in city factories. The Model T Ford was finally becoming affordable for middle-class families, putting more cars out on the roads. And that, among other things, made city streets even more congested and dangerous. Peter Norton says automobiles in those days were referred to as death cars and regularly personified as the Grim Reaper in newspaper cartoons. Meanwhile, drivers were nicknamed things like speed demons.
A very popular one was Roadhog. Also another popular one was Joyrider.
In the 1920s, motor vehicle accidents caused more than 200,000 deaths in the United States, and many of those killed by cars were children. Cities would honor these kids with monuments, parades, and the tolling of church bells. Their deaths were seen as a public failure we all shared in, almost the way we grieve victims of school violence now or honor fallen soldiers.
And the mothers, far from being blamed, were singled out for special honor.
They were called White Star Mothers. And all this press was not a good look for the auto industry, which included not just manufacturers, but also auto clubs, dealers, and oil companies, in addition to other businesses with a serious financial stake in cars, like road builders, contractors, taxi cab companies. It's a long list, which is why, for simplicity, I'm going to call them what they were called back then: motordom.
And motordom, about a century ago, was at a turning point.
In 1923, 42,000 people in the city of Cincinnati decided they were fed up with car-related deaths, and they signed petitions demanding a new law. They wanted the city to physically force cars to slow down.
And that took the form of a ballot initiative for a city ordinance that would require every driver with a car licensed in Cincinnati to equip that car with a mechanical speed governor that would make it impossible for that car to go faster than 25 miles per hour.
When Cincinnati's car dealers and lobbyists learned about this proposed city ordinance, they freaked out. And they formed an organization called the General Citizens Committee, running a campaign on the importance of preserving our personal freedom. Today we might call this a dark money campaign because motordom didn't exactly want voters to know that it was behind the opposition. And it worked. The Cincinnati speed control proposal got rejected at the polls. But this was just the first controversy of many for motordom, unless they could change the narrative.
They're saying, gentlemen, we have to take control of the safety issue. We have to redefine safety as a problem of restricting pedestrians, educating children, school traffic safety education, enforcement of pedestrian regulations, and ultimately the building of motor roads that permit fast driving. That will permit us to redirect blame from the driver to the walker and even to the child.
One of the first ways that motordom went about this was to take control of the messaging, or distort it, rather.
The National Automobile Chamber of Commerce came up with an ingenious plan.
They invited all of the newspapers in the country to send them records on traffic injuries and deaths. And then they spun them into professionally copywritten articles that newspapers could run in their journals for free. Starting in 1924, these articles popped up everywhere.
And they're just saying, well, in Dayton or whatever, pedestrians' carelessness was responsible for most of their injuries and deaths.
Most pedestrian fatalities are caused by the pedestrian's own negligence.
One of the most striking illustrations of how fast this change happened was that there's an amazing newspaper article in November 1924, so just a year after the Cincinnati thing, where the traffic magistrate of the city of New York, a guy named Bruce Cobb, opines and says, I don't get it, but all of a sudden the newspapers are all blaming the walker and this is nuts.
What Bruce Cobb didn't know, of course, is that those articles, which were often published without a byline, had been funded and written by motordom. I like the term that you say in the book. They started calling people reckless pedestrians, which is such a crazy term to me.
Yeah, it was actually sort of dead on arrival term. They tried that term, reckless pedestrians. It got ridiculed in the newspapers. So they pivoted. They kept the concept, but instead they switched over to jaywalker as primarily as the term of abuse.
Jaywalking is the most hazardous possible means of crossing. You are more than doubling your chances of being run down.
As we get into the 1920s, jaywalker stopped being slang for a country bumpkin. It turned into a legal crime, not just in Kansas City, but across the country. And to convince lawmakers and everyday people to demonize and even criminalize these jaywalkers, motordom needed an on-the-ground PR campaign. So in addition to the newspaper articles, they also turned to Boy Scouts.
All over the U.S., Boy Scouts would be issued these little cards, and these cards had printed on them things like, did you know you were jaywalking? Here's what jaywalking is, and here why jaywalking is no longer acceptable.
I found evidence in Kansas City newspapers of Boy Scouts doing this as early as 1917.
When you are uptown today, Mr. and Mrs. Citizens of Kansas City, and thoughtlessly you attempt to round a corner and get outside of the prescribed lines for pedestrians marked on the pavement, do not get offended or peeved if a little Boy Scout turns you in the right direction.
The boys will have 50,000 cards of instructions to distribute to jaywalkers, but keep within the white lines and follow the directions, and you will not be spotted as a rube rambler from the tall grass country.
But just like a decade earlier in Kansas City, some pedestrians simply did not accept these restrictions.
Favorite example of mine is from a newspaper article from Grand Rapids, Michigan. The reporter says that a young couple, a young man and a young woman, were walking together, and they got one of these cards and then set out to collect as many of these cards as they could by jaywalking every chance they got.
That being said, pedestrians were quickly losing ground in the court of public opinion. Motordom put together a public safety curriculum for schools to start teaching children these car-centric perspectives early.
We'll give them posters, we'll give them textbooks, we'll give them exercises.
They even took over the school safety patrol program.
And all of this stuff, free to the schools, will be committed to convincing the child that the street is a place that they should not enter except under the most limited and controlled circumstances.
In 1925, Detroit schools assembled 1,300 children to watch the mock trial of a 12-year-old accused of jaywalking. The student jury sentenced him to wash school blackboards for an entire week. Then there was the young Texas student, a few years later, who got caught for the same crime. He was ordered by his peers to write an essay titled, "Why I Should Not Jaywalk." And I'll point out, letting cars take control of the roads was a pretty radical idea in the 1920s. It would be another 20 years, depending on the city, before motorists were actually the majority of street traffic. Regardless, on January 24th, 1925, a new anti-jaywalking ordinance took effect in the city of Los Angeles. The first arrest at 2 a.m. that morning came with a $5 fine. The law was similar to the one passed in Kansas City more than a decade earlier, but LA's ordinance had more nefarious goals, because it didn't really come from a place of concern for the safety of Los Angeles residents.
So the Los Angeles traffic ordinance, we have to be very clear about this. It was not written by a bunch of policy experts or lawyers. It was written by a man working directly for a Studebaker dealer. He said, I want to sell cars, and therefore I want a traffic ordinance in Los Angeles that prioritizes drivers, so that if a pedestrian is hit, the driver isn't automatically blamed.
The Los Angeles City Council implemented the ordinance over the veto of the mayor. But unlike Kansas City, Los Angeles police didn't arrest many people for jaywalking. It was really more of a public shaming campaign, one that continued on for decades.
The jaywalker. He crosses the street anywhere he likes. In the middle of the block, he just walks into the traffic.
Peter compares it to the anti-drug messaging of the 1980s and 90s.
And you know what a jay is? Well, besides being a bird, it also means a silly person. And that is just what the jitter-brained jaywalker is.
It's interesting to me that they weren't really penalizing people for it as much as ridiculing, kind of like what you were just talking about with the cards. And I have to think, was part of it because of how ineffective Kansas City's ordinance was and these other ordinances that really didn't take off?
Yes. Los Angeles in particular had some particularly shrewd people who figured out the lesson of Kansas City. One was E.B. Lefferts, Edward B. Lefferts, who was the president of the Automobile Club of Southern California. And he put it, and I'm quoting now, "We viewed this problem as a problem of psychology, not engineering." He realized that what people dread, above all, is looking stupid in front of other people, looking foolish in front of other people, being humiliated in front of other people. And so Lefferts said, look, police officers, go ahead and arrest the most egregious cases, but I want your primary enforcement mechanism to be drawing unwanted attention to the person crossing the street. By that he meant blowing a whistle at them, pointing at them, and in the case of women, picking them up and carrying them bodily to the curb, which was frightening and humiliating. So people on the sidewalk are thinking, I don't want to be like her. I don't want to be that person. And that was to them step one. Step two was to make this into a model traffic ordinance for every city in the country. And it's the ancestor of all of our municipal traffic ordinances in the USA today.
And in a lot of American cities, jaywalking ordinances have continued to be on the books. But over time, the stakes changed.
You're being detained for jaywalking. For jaywalking. Get down on the ground. Now you're under arrest. Now you're under arrest.
Jaywalking as a concept is not something that is about safety. It is about enforcement.
That's to be continued in part 2 of this story, coming next month. This episode of A People's History of Kansas City was reported, produced, and mixed by me, Mackenzie Martin. Editing by Suzanne Hogan and Gabe Rosenberg. If you have a local jaywalking story that you think we should know about, email us at peopleshistorykc@kcur.org. Special thanks to KCUR Studios intern Jacob Smolin. In addition to my KCUR colleagues you heard in this episode, Savannah Holly Bates, Ross Wright, Salisa Kalakal, Byron Love, and Zane Irwin. Additional audio from Davis Sid Productions, Progressive Pictures, Fletcher Henderson, the Victor Military Band, and Blue Dot Sessions. We are a production of KCUR Studios, a podcast network in Kansas City. If you want to keep up with us, make sure you hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can also find us on Instagram at KC People's History. Also, thank you to everyone who's been supporting the show with donations at kcur.org/support. We're a public media station, which means we had our federal funding cut last year. And we're currently on the lookout for a new home after losing our building of 40 years this month. So we're really grateful for our community. Thank you so much for listening.